Hi, welcome to Magazines and Symbolic Convergence Theory. We're going to talk about making meaning together. Let's go. Our first part of class today, we're going to talk about Ernest Borman's Symbolic Convergence Theory. To start this off, we're going to talk about stories. And to do that, I want to begin by watching a story. We're going to watch part of a speech by Barack Obama. And as we watch it, I would like you to pay attention to the story that he tells. I want you particularly to notice some of the themes in this story. To give you some context, this story is from early in his first term of being president. He is telling this story at the University of Maryland at College Park, and this is the ending of a long policy speech about healthcare reform. This is before the Affordable Care Act was passed. He was trying to build support for it and explain why it was important, and this is the very end of his long speech about that. So, I know that you just started watching this, but pause, go back to Schoology, and watch clip 1, Obama's story, now. Okay, so what are some of the themes in this story? Have you ever had an experience that includes any of these themes? What is it? Perhaps you've had a grumpy morning. Maybe you've had your day changed by a stranger doing something that kind of cheered you up. Maybe you've had somebody make a real difference in your life. Maybe you know the power that one single person can have. Maybe you know someone in your community who really shapes that community quite strongly. These are all themes that are in the story that then President Obama told. None of these stories have to do with health, right? He doesn't tell a story about a mother who gets cancer and can't take care of her kids. He doesn't tell a story about a kid who doesn't have health care and needs it, right? He could have told those stories. Those are, in fact, the stories that we might expect him to tell. So why does he tell this one? Why is this the story that he chooses to tell at the end of a speech about why we need a different healthcare system? Well, maybe because of symbolic convergence. Here's how symbolic convergence works. You start out with a fantasy. Now, a fantasy in literature is something that maybe has magic in it, or elves, or dwarves, or maybe even something that happens in the future, right? But here, a fantasy is a story that might be true or might not be true. The important part about a fantasy is just that it is a story that one person is telling to another person or a group of people. It doesn't matter whether or not it's true. That is not the important part of the story. The definition that Borman gives us for fantasy is the creative and imaginative interpretation of events that fulfills a psychological or rhetorical need. Did Obama's umbrella really break? Was there really a bad story about him in the New York Times? Maybe it was the Washington Post. We don't know. Were those exact details important to the story? No. What was important to the story was that he was having a bad day. What was important to the story was that he was grumpy. It doesn't matter if those exact details happened. What matters was the grumpy mood, was that things weren't going right, was that he wasn't feeling well, right? The creative and imaginative interpretation of events that fulfills a psychological or rhetorical need. You're telling a story. You're getting your message across. You're explaining what happened in a way that other people can relate to, in a way that they understand what you're trying to say. This is what a fantasy is. This is the purpose that it serves. Okay, so here's what they do. They create symbolic convergence, and here is how that process works. People use stories, which again, they're called fantasies in this system. People use stories or fantasies to create shared meaning. This shared meaning is often expressed in recurring themes, which Borman calls fantasy themes, because fantasy is the word that he's using for all this stuff. As people add their own stories on the theme, fantasy chain, the group feels more connected, fantasy chain reaction. So we have this story of fired up, ready to go as a recurring theme, and Obama picks this up from the fantasy of the initial time that he hears it, but he starts telling this story at campaign events. He starts telling this story as he is campaigning for president. And other people start telling this story who support him in his campaign for president. And it starts to become kind of an unofficial campaign slogan. And so this fantasy theme of fired up, ready to go starts to mean that people believe that every voice counts and every voice matters, and that you can actually do something to change the political system, and you can actually do something to change what's going on in society. And the way that you do that is by voting for Obama. Remember that Obama's slogan, maybe you don't remember, it may be important for you to know, Obama's slogan when he ran was hope. And so fired up, ready to go, this idea of every voice counts, every voice matters, you can do something to make a difference, you yourself can change the world, is connected to this idea that Obama is hope. And so you get this recurring theme, you get this fantasy chain, you get this idea of connection, and that you are part of something bigger. And it spirals and it spirals and it spirals. Now, did that actually happen? Most people think no. Most people think that Obama didn't do most of the things they voted for him for, that he didn't fulfill that hope that they were wanting, that their voices didn't matter nearly as much as they were hoping they would. But at the time of the election, people felt very connected. People felt very much like their voices mattered. They felt a lot of hope. And so this fantasy chain worked really well at that time. Groups become stronger when they share themes with each other and when they create fantasy chains together. This is one of the main ways that groups are strengthened. They connect to each other, they have shared meaning, and they create symbols that they can use together based on the stories. And this is called symbolic convergence. This is why teams have mascots. This is why they have chants. This is why they have songs. This is why fans have chants and songs and symbols. Because it helps to connect them to each other. It helps to make them feel like a group. It helps to make them feel connected. And you start to develop in-group language. And you start to develop in-group jokes. And you start to have special symbols that only the people in the group know. And it feels so good. It feels so much like you belong and you are special and you are part of the group, and it's awesome. It's a fabulous feeling to be part of a group in that way. It really is. Symbolic convergence makes people feel really, really good. So let's try this out with a different story. Clip 2 is of the speech in the sports film Remember the Titans. I don't know if you've seen this film. It's kind of old now, but in this film, there are two high schools, a white high school and a black high school, and they are ordered to integrate. And so the two football teams are merged, and the black football coach gets put in charge, and the white football coach gets made the assistant. And all the players are merged together, and they have training camp over the summer together. And this is kind of the test for how integrating the whole high school is going to go, because the students on the football team have training camp together before school starts, and so they're kind of trying to figure out how to play together as a team. It is not going well. I don't know what kind of high school this is, but they all go to the College of William and Mary to have their football camp all summer. And like I said, it's not going well. They are not integrating. The white players keep only tackling black players, and the white quarterback is only throwing to the other white players, and the black players are only tackling the white players and only blocking for the black players, and it's a hot mess. It is not working. And so at this point in the film, the head coach, Coach Boone, played by Denzel Washington, makes everybody get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and run through the woods somehow from the middle of Virginia to Gettysburg in 3 hours. So I don't know what kind of football team this is, because that's a real long run. I do not know how they do that in 3 hours. They are all superheroes, I guess. And watch carefully, because you might be able to see Ryan Reynolds in there as he's one of the quarterbacks. But we're going to watch the speech that Coach Boone gives when they get to Gettysburg. I want you to pay attention to the stories and the themes and the fantasy chains that Coach Boone creates. He is trying to get these two separate teams, white football team and black football team, to gel into a single team. How does he try to do that? What symbols does he create? What fantasy chains does he use? How does he use stories and themes to try to do that? So, stop now, go watch that clip 2, and then come back. All right, so now that you've practiced applying symbolic convergence theory, let's talk about magazines, which you read about in the textbook for today. Here are some characteristics of magazines. I'm pulling these out of the textbook. These are the sorts of things that you should be reading for in the book, and that will help you as you are thinking about how each type of media functions. So magazines are usually specific to their audience, right? They are topical and trendy and tailored to a subculture, but they are not localized. They're not like newspapers that they are for like a specific place. They are about a specific theme or like interest, right? But they're not usually specific to a local area, and so they are sent all over the place, all over the country usually, and so they tend to be not about a local area. They're kind of geographically diverse. There are two basic strategies for how magazines tend to market themselves. They can either seek a definable, targeted, loyal audience, like the New Yorker, which is a very large version of this, but basically like a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but a group of people who are very similar to each other and will all always get this magazine. Or you can try to do the kind of checkout model, a broad generic readership who will sometimes get the magazine and sometimes not, right? Maybe people, when they're standing in the checkout line, will buy this kind of version of it. And Time magazine kind of works more like this. People who buy the New Yorker tend to subscribe to it and always get it, and the people who are fairly similar to each other. People who get Time magazine are a much broader readership. We're talking about fantasy themes with magazines because one of the things that magazines do super well is create shared themes amongst people who share an interest. Because magazines are tailored to subcultures. They are not generally, time aside, going for a generic broad population. And so they're creating shared themes among people who share a common interest. And these themes grow into fantasy chains. I don't know why the S is a different color, but whatever. And shared meanings over time, leading to shared symbols and symbolic convergence, right? People get the same kinds of stories and meanings, and they develop a kind of shared set of examples and stories and jokes and terms that they can use through reading the same magazines together. And this is done especially well in zines. What are zines? Well, zines are usually handmade by a single person or a small group for a niche fandom or interest. They frequently feature remixed or collaged art. They're famous for in-jokes, community building, and other hallmarks of symbolic convergence. They are usually quite small. Usually zines are only like 12 pages or something like that. And they were very popular in the 1980s when photocopiers became readily available, and they're experiencing resurgence now because digital media is now widely available and people are able to create and distribute them cheaply again. So, for example, I am currently working on a zine with a nonprofit organization that I work with about a conference that we all went to about a month ago now, where we're taking drawings and writing and notes from the conference from all the different people who went and putting them together into a booklet for people who were unable to go, but also for people who were, so that we have kind of a record of this conference from the perspective of the people who attended it. Okay, so I'm going to leave you to think about whether magazines are a mass media platform. You should be getting pretty good at this by now. And whether they're a mass media industry, again, you should be pretty good at this by now. And you should be able to put the characteristics of magazines, add another column to your table, and fill it in. But I want to pause here and think through with you the future of magazines. especially because I think if we compare and contrast the magazines and newspapers, that might give us some insights into both of these forms of media. So magazines survived the internet happening a lot more smoothly than newspapers. Why? Why are magazines doing so much better than newspapers? What is the characteristic that's different? They're both printed on paper. Magazines come out less frequently, and they're in color. But I don't think those are the reasons that they're doing better. What are some of magazines' characteristics that helped it transition into the internet era or the internet age? In what ways are magazines different from newspapers? In what ways are they the same? Which of these differences do you think mattered most in how differently these media translated to digital spaces? What was it, or what is it, that made magazines able to be okay when the internet happened, while newspapers are all really, really struggling? What's the difference here? All right, let's talk about homework. Homework 1. Track the music you listen to from now until next class. Include what music it is and why you listen to it, and then also at least one other question, like how it made you feel, or where you were, or who you were with, or what kind of device you were listening to it on, like your computer or your phone or your Discman. 2. Read chapter 5 in the textbook about recordings, which is mostly about types of music and ways of recording it, because that's what we're talking about next class. And 3, have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. Bye.